There is a certain kind of cruelty that wears the face of confidence. It stands tall, it laughs loudly, it opens doors for mistresses and slams them shut on pregnant wives. It throws a poor, trembling, rain-soaked woman into the cold and doesn't flinch, and it never checks the deed. That is the cruelty that lives at the center of this story. His mother was the architect of it, the woman who had spent years quietly despising her son's poor wife, quietly waiting for the right moment to move the mistress in, quietly building a plan that she believed was foolproof. And the night she executed it, the night she looked his pregnant wife in the eyes and threw her into the rain, she believed she had finally won. His cruel husband believed the same thing. He stood in his warm hallway, arm around his mistress, and he laughed. Laughed at the woman carrying his child, laughed at her poverty, at her soaked clothes, at the way she stumbled in the dark trying to find somewhere, anywhere, to go. But laughter, when it is built on ignorance, is nothing more than a countdown. And the clock had already started. Because what no one in that mansion had ever thought to ask, what the scheming mother never checked, what the smug mistress never questioned, what the cruel, laughing husband had completely, catastrophically forgotten, was whose name held the deed to the mansion they were so comfortable standing in. Hers, his poor, pregnant, rain-soaked wife, the woman they had just thrown out. And the locks? Already changed. Not by some miracle, not by luck, by her. A woman who had seen this night coming long before they did, who had quietly, carefully, deliberately prepared. Because she knew that when people show you who they are, the wisest thing you can do is believe them. So here is your question before this story begins. What do you do when the person you threw into the rain turns out to own the house you're standing in, and the locks are already changed before you even stop laughing? Watch, because the answer will change how you see everything. Dear viewers, this story will teach you one of the most important lessons life offers, that preparation is the greatest revenge, and that dignity, patience, and legal wisdom can outlast any betrayal. You will learn why protecting what belongs to you is never petty. It is survival. Watch to the very end, drop in the comments what lesson moved you most, and tell us what you would have done in her place. Then subscribe, because we tell stories here that don't just entertain you, they prepare you for the real world. The rain came without warning, but the cruelty had been planned for months. Her name was Elaine. And if you had met Elaine 3 years before this story begins, before the mansion, before the marriage, before the nights she lay awake listening to a husband who no longer pretended to love her, you would have met a woman of extraordinary, quiet strength. She came from little. Everyone made sure she never forgot that. She had grown up in a small rented house on the east side of the city, raised by a mother who worked double shifts and still found time to press Elaine's school uniform every morning. They didn't have much, but they had dignity. And her mother, God rest her, had pressed that into Elaine's spirit the same way she pressed those uniforms. Firmly, deliberately, permanently. But dignity, as Elaine had learned, God does not always protect you from the people who mistake your gentleness for weakness. His name was Derek. Derek Coleman was the kind of man who looked wonderful from a distance. Tall, well-dressed, charming in public. The sort of man who opened car doors when people were watching and forgot you existed when they weren't. He had inherited the Coleman family wealth, a real estate portfolio his late father had built over 40 years, and with it, He had inherited the Coleman family arrogance. He had married Elaine 4 years ago, and if you asked him today why, he would struggle to answer. But the truth he had never said out loud, was that he had married her because she was different. Because her quietness felt like peace in a world that had always been loud and demanding around him. Because she asked for nothing. And because she made him feel, briefly, like a better man. But Derek Coleman had never actually become a better man. And the woman who made certain of that was already inside the house. Dorothy Coleman, Derek's mother, was the kind of woman who could smile at your face and dismantle your life with her next phone call. She was elegant, ruthless, and possessed of the particular cruelty that comes from a lifetime of getting exactly what she wanted. She had despised Elaine from the moment Derek brought her home. Not because Elaine had done anything wrong, but because Elaine's poverty offended Dorothy's carefully constructed image of what a Coleman wife should be. And Dorothy had been patient. She had waited, and watched, and quietly, over 2 years, she had introduced Derek to Vanessa. And Vanessa was everything Dorothy wanted for her son. On the surface, polished, socially connected, unbothered by moral inconvenience. She had slipped into Derek's life the way smoke slips under a door. Slowly, imperceptibly, until suddenly the room is full of it, and you can barely breathe. Elaine had known about Vanessa for 8 months. She had said nothing, not because she was weak, but because she was watching and preparing. Now, tonight, Elaine was 7 months pregnant. 7 months. Her belly full and round with a life she had already decided would never know the instability she had married into. She had spent the day on her feet, cooking a dinner nobody thanked her for, straightening a house that didn't feel like hers anymore, fielding cold silence from a husband who no longer looked her in the eye. But she had also, on that same afternoon, made a phone call. We will come back to that phone call. Remember it. It was Dorothy who came to her first, not Derek. Dorothy. She appeared in the doorway of the kitchen at 7 p.m., dressed as though she were attending a dinner party, a thin smile arranged across her face like a weapon she had already decided to use. Elaine. Her voice was soft, surgical. It's time for you to go. Elaine turned slowly from the counter. I'm sorry? Vanessa will be moving in tonight. Dorothy tilted her head. Derek has made his decision. I suggest you gather what you need and leave quietly. For the sake of your dignity. For the sake of your dignity. Said by the woman about to destroy it. Elaine looked past Dorothy's shoulder and found Derek standing in the hallway. Watching, his jaw set. His eyes empty of apology. And beside him, already inside the house, already holding a suitcase, already looking around the mansion like a woman measuring curtains, stood Vanessa. Elaine's hands went still on the counter. She looked at her husband, at his mother, at the mistress in her hallway. And then she looked down at her belly. Derek. Her voice didn't shake. You're going to do this. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. He looked away. Dorothy stepped forward and opened the front door herself. And the rain, cold, merciless, and sheets thick, poured in from the dark outside. Leave, Dorothy said. And Derek Coleman, the cruel husband, the father of the child she carried, said nothing. He laughed, not loudly, but enough. Elaine picked up her coat from the hook beside the door. She picked up the small bag she had packed, quietly, 2 days ago, when she had first confirmed what was coming, and she walked out into the rain. The door slammed behind her, and from inside that warm-lit mansion, she could still hear him laughing. But Elaine did not cry. She pulled out her phone, rain running down her face, and she made the second call of the day. "It's time," she said quietly. "Change the locks. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. That bag she packed 2 days ago, that phone call she made this afternoon, the locksmith she just called in the rain, none of that was panic. None of that was desperation. That was a woman who had read the room, studied the players, and moved 3 steps ahead of everyone who thought they had already won. The question is, what did she know that they didn't? The rain was still falling, but Elaine was no longer standing in it. She was sitting in the warm front seat of a car. Her car, parked 2 blocks from the mansion, with a cup of coffee her best friend Renee had brought, a dry towel around her shoulders, and the calm, focused expression of a woman who had not been defeated tonight. She had been activated. Now, let me take you back. Because to understand what Elaine knew, you have to understand where she had been. 18 months ago. Elaine had been folding laundry in the upstairs bedroom when she found the first text message on Derek's phone. She hadn't been looking for it. She hadn't been suspicious. Not yet. The phone had buzzed face up on the bed, and the name Vanessa had appeared with a message that nobody sends to a colleague. Elaine had stood there for a long time, holding a folded shirt, reading those words. And here is what she did not do. She did not scream. She did not confront Derek. She did not call Dorothy and demand answers. She put the shirt down. She picked up Derek's phone. She memorized what she needed to memorize. She set the phone back down exactly where it had been. And then, quietly, calmly, with the kind of clarity that only comes to women who have survived hard things before, she called a lawyer. Now, pay close attention, because this is where the story changes. The lawyer's name was Margaret Osei, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who specialized in matrimonial property law and who had, over 20 years, seen every variation of what Elaine was now living through. "Tell me everything," Margaret had said at that first meeting. "Leave nothing out." And Elaine had. She had told Margaret about the Coleman family wealth, about the mansion, about how, 4 years ago, when Derek had first purchased the mansion, he had placed it in Elaine's name. Not out of love, but out of legal strategy. The Coleman family had been navigating a business lawsuit at the time, and their attorney had advised that transferring certain assets into a spouse's name would protect them from seizure during litigation. Derek had done it without blinking, because at the time he had trusted Elaine completely. Because at the time he had believed she would always be exactly what she was: quiet, grateful, and unaware of the power she held. But Margaret had made Elaine aware. "This deed," Margaret had said, sliding a document across the desk, "places full legal ownership of the Coleman mansion in your name, Elaine. Not jointly, solely. Your name, your asset." Elaine had looked at the document for a long time. "He forgot," she said quietly. "Men like him always do," Margaret replied. "And here, right here, is the lesson that every person watching this story needs to burn into their memory. Know what you own. Know what is legally yours, because the people who want to take everything from you are counting on you not knowing." Over the next 18 months, Elaine had done 3 things with the precision of a woman building a fortress. First, she had secured the deed. She had obtained certified copies, stored them with Margaret, and registered additional documentation with the county records office to ensure there could be no dispute, no forgery, no convenient claim of error. Second, she had opened her own accounts, quietly, separately. Every gift she had ever received, every small inheritance from her late mother, modest but real, had been moved, protected, and positioned. She was not wealthy, but she was no longer financially invisible. Third, and this is the one that should make you sit up straight, she had documented everything. Every cold silence from Derek. Every occasion Dorothy had humiliated her in front of guests. Every evening Vanessa's name had appeared in phone records she had legally obtained. Every text, every date, every receipt. 18 months of documentation, neatly organized, securely stored, in Margaret's office. Renee, sitting in the driver's seat, watched Elaine drink her coffee and shook her head slowly. "You really saw all of this coming?" Elaine looked out at the rain. "He showed me who he was the night I found that first text. I just chose to believe him." "And the baby?" Renee asked softly. Elaine's hand went to her belly. And for the first time that night, just briefly, something flickered across her face. Not weakness, not grief, resolve. "This baby," Elaine said quietly, "will never grow up watching her mother be thrown into the rain and accept it." Renee nodded. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and then looked at Elaine. The locksmith just finished. Elaine set down her coffee cup. She straightened in her seat. And the calm on her face, that steady, unshakable calm, was the most powerful thing in that car. "Good," she said. "Now, let's call Margaret." "Now, let me ask you something important." While Elaine was sitting in that car, composed and prepared, do you know what was happening inside the mansion? And Derek had just tried his key in the front door, and it didn't turn. He tried it again, and again. His brow furrowed. He looked at Vanessa. He looked at his mother. He tried the back door, the side entrance, the garage, every lock, changed. And the deed to the mansion he was locked out of? In his pregnant wife's name. The wife he had just thrown into the rain. The wife he had laughed at. The laughter stopped at 9:47 p.m. Not gradually, not slowly. All at once. Derek Coleman was not a man accustomed to locked doors. He had grown up in houses where every door opened for him, literally and figuratively. Where his name alone was a key. Where the world rearranged itself around his comfort and his convenience and his pleasure. Because that is what the Coleman name had always purchased. But tonight, every door of his mansion was sealed against him. And for the first time in his adult life, Derek Coleman stood on the outside of something he believed he owned. Cold, confused, and beginning, slowly, to feel something unfamiliar crawling up the back of his neck. Fear. He had tried every entrance twice. Then 3 times. Vanessa had watched him with growing unease, her composed expression beginning to crack at the edges. Dorothy stood on the front steps, arms crossed, her jaw tight, because Dorothy Coleman did not do confusion well, and right now, she was very confused. "Call a locksmith," Dorothy said sharply. "Have them break the locks." "Mother." Derek turned to her, his voice lower now, something shifting in his eyes. "You can't break locks on a property you don't—" He stopped. He stopped mid-sentence. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened all evening. Dorothy stared at him. "What?" Derek said nothing. He was standing very still. His mind was moving, slowly, reluctantly. The way a mind moves when it is approaching a truth it desperately does not want to reach. He was thinking about 4 years ago. He was thinking about a lawsuit, about an attorney's advice, about a document he had signed without reading carefully, because he had been distracted and arrogant and certain that it didn't matter, that nothing could ever really threaten what was his. He was thinking about Elaine's name. On a deed. Derek. Dorothy's voice had shifted now. The sharpness was gone. Something colder had replaced it. "Whose name is on this property?" Derek didn't answer, because the answer was already walking toward them. It was Renee who brought the envelope. She pulled up to the curb in front of the mansion, stepped out of the car unhurriedly, walked up the front path with the deliberate ease of a woman delivering something long overdue, and held out a sealed envelope to Derek without a word. He took it. Renee looked at him, just once, steadily. And then she looked at Dorothy. And then at Vanessa standing awkwardly by the front door with her suitcase still in her hand. Then Renee turned and walked back to the car without a single word spoken. Commentary. That walk back to the car? That was dignity by proxy. When a woman is too composed to come herself, she sends her silence ahead of her. And that silence, it speaks volumes. Derek opened the envelope with hands that were no longer entirely steady. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a certified copy of the deed to the Coleman mansion. Sole ownership, Elaine Coleman, née Elaine Patricia Marsh. Every line notarized, every seal legitimate, irrefutable. The second was a formal legal notice from the office of Margaret Osei, matrimonial property attorney, notifying Derek Coleman that as sole owner of the property, Elaine Coleman was exercising her legal right to secure the premises, and that any attempt to enter the property without her written consent would constitute trespassing and would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. The third document, and this is the one that made Derek's hands go completely still, was a single printed photograph of Vanessa entering a hotel with Dorothy Coleman 18 months ago. 3 days after Elaine had first found the text messages, a photograph that told a story without a single word of caption. Dorothy hadn't just introduced them casually. Dorothy had orchestrated this from a hotel meeting. Dorothy had been the architect not just of tonight, but of the entire affair. Derek looked up from the photograph slowly. He looked at his mother. Dorothy's face had gone the color of cold ash. And now, let me pause here, because I need you to feel what is happening in this moment. This is not just a man discovering his wife owns the house. This is a man discovering that the 2 people he chose over her, his mother and his mistress, had been conspiring together long before he ever made a single decision. That his choices had never fully been his own. That he had been handled, managed, directed, like a piece on a board, by the woman who raised him. "Mother," his voice was barely above a whisper. "You planned this." Dorothy lifted her chin. "I did what was best for—" "You planned all of it." His voice cracked on the last word. Not from grief for Elaine, not yet, but from the particular devastation of a man realizing he was never the one in control of his own life. Vanessa, who had been silent through all of this, and took one long look at the legal notice in Derek's hand, at the locked door behind her, at Dorothy's stricken face, and then she picked up her suitcase. "I'm not going to jail over this," she said flatly, and she walked down the front path, called a car, and was gone within 4 minutes. No loyalty, no love, no second glance. Because that is what cruelty built on convenience always does when the convenience disappears. It leaves. Dorothy tried to speak again, but Derek had stopped listening to her. He was standing in the rain now, the same rain he had watched his pregnant wife stand in less than 2 hours ago, holding a photograph and a deed and a legal notice, and feeling, for the first time, the full and terrible weight of what he had done. Not what had been done to him. What he had done. He had laughed. While she stood in the rain, carrying his child, holding a bag she had packed in secret because she had known, she had always known, he had laughed. And now, the door was locked, and the deed was in her name, and the mistress was gone, and his mother had no answer for the photograph in his hand, and the rain kept falling on him. But here is what Scene 3 does not yet answer, and what Scene 4 is going to deliver with the full force of everything this story has been building toward. What does Elaine do next? Because vengeance and justice are not the same thing. And a woman who spent 18 months preparing, who documented, who secured, who planned with the precision of someone who refused to become a victim, that woman does not simply take back a house. She decides what kind of woman she wants her child to see. 3 days passed, and in those 3 days, Derek Coleman learned what silence truly sounds like when it comes from someone who no longer needs to speak. He had called 17 times the first night, 11 times the second day, 4 times on the third, because even pride, when it is sufficiently broken, eventually stops pretending it doesn't need to make the call. Elaine had not answered a single one, not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but because she was busy, deliberately, purposefully, powerfully busy. She was staying at Renee's house, a modest, warm, 2-bedroom home that felt more like safety than the mansion had felt in years. She had her bag, she had her documents, she had Margaret on speed dial, and every morning she woke up, made herself tea, sat by the window with both hands on her belly, and she thought. So not about Derek, not about Dorothy, not about Vanessa, who had apparently checked into a hotel and not been heard from since. She thought about her child. She thought about her mother, gone 3 years now, who had pressed uniforms every morning in a rented house and built a daughter with a spine made of quiet, unbreakable steel. She thought about what kind of story she wanted her child to grow up inside of, and that thinking, that deliberate, unhurried thinking, was where the real power of this story lives. Commentary: I need you to understand something before we go further. A lot of people, when they finally hold the power, use it the way it was used against them. They slam doors, they laugh, they humiliate, and in doing so, they become the very thing that hurt them. But every now and then, not often, but powerfully, someone chooses differently. Watch what Elaine chooses, because this is the part of the story that will stay with you long after it ends. On the 4th day, Elaine called Margaret. "I want to meet with Derek," she said. Margaret paused. "On what terms?" "Mine," Elaine said simply. The meeting took place in Margaret's office, neutral ground, deliberately chosen. Derek arrived first, which told Elaine everything she needed to know about where his confidence now stood. He was dressed well, because men like Derek always dress well even when they are falling apart. But his eyes carried the particular hollowness of someone who had not slept properly in 4 days. He stood when Elaine entered. She noticed that. She did not comment on it. She sat across from him, her hands folded on the table over her belly, and she looked at him with an expression that was neither warm nor cold. It was something more unsettling than either. It was clarity. "I'm not here to punish you, Derek," she said. He blinked. That was not what he had expected. "I'm here because we are going to have a child in 2 months. And that child deserves a world that is arranged with intention. Not chaos, not cruelty, not whatever the last 4 years have been." Derek opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," Elaine said quietly, but firmly. He closed his mouth. Commentary: Did you see that? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. That is what preparation does. It removes the need to perform strength, because the strength is simply there. Elaine laid 3 things on the table. The first was a property transfer proposal. She was not keeping the mansion out of spite, but she was transferring it on her terms, a structured legal arrangement that would ensure her child's financial security regardless of what Derek chose to do with his life going forward. The child would have a home, full stop, non-negotiable. The second was a co-parenting agreement, already drafted by Margaret, fair and detailed, that established clear, consistent boundaries for how their child would be raised. Not by courts deciding in chaos, by them deciding now, with intention. The third, and this was the one that broke something open in Derek's chest, was a single handwritten letter. Not from a lawyer. From Elaine. He picked it up and read it in silence. It was not a letter of anger. It was not a list of grievances. It was 3 paragraphs. Calm, honest, and devastating in the way that only truth delivered without venom can be devastating. It said, in essence, I saw who you were. I chose to prepare rather than collapse. I am not your enemy, but I will never again be your sacrifice. And the child we made deserves a father who decides, right now, what kind of man he actually wants to be. Derek set the letter down, and for the first time in this entire story, for the first time since the rain, since the laughter, since the locked door and the photograph and the deed, Derek Coleman did something he had never done easily in his adult life. He wept. Not for show, not for sympathy, for reckoning. Now, some of you watching this are thinking, she should have taken everything. She should have destroyed him the way he tried to destroy her. And I understand that feeling. Truly. But here is what Elaine understood that most people miss. She had already won. The question was never what she could take. The question was what she wanted to build. And you cannot build something new with hands still full of what you're trying to burn down. Dorothy Coleman was a different matter entirely. Elaine did not meet with Dorothy. She did not send a letter. She did not offer clarity or co-parenting agreements or handwritten words of truth. What she did, quietly, through Margaret, was file a formal complaint documenting Dorothy's role in the orchestrated scheme to remove a pregnant woman from her legal property. The complaint went to the appropriate authorities. The hotel photograph was included. The timeline was included. Every documented detail from 18 months of preparation was included. Dorothy Coleman, the architect, and the woman who had smiled and opened a door into the rain, faced legal consequences that her elegance and her Coleman name could not entirely smooth away. And that accountability was not cruelty. That was simply the law doing what the law exists to do. 2 months later, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and new beginnings, Elaine delivered a daughter. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfect. She named her Clara, after Elaine's mother, the woman who had pressed uniforms in a rented house and built a daughter who knew what she owned and refused to be thrown out of it. Derek was in the waiting room. Elaine had allowed that. Not because she had forgiven everything. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, is a long road, and she was only at its beginning. But because Clara deserved a father who was present, and Derek had spent the last 2 months showing, slowly and imperfectly, that he understood the magnitude of what he had almost thrown away. Almost. But not completely. Not yet. That story, Derek's redemption, if he earns it, was not Elaine's to write. It was his. But Elaine's story, this story, ended not in the hospital room. It ended 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning. Elaine sat by the window in her own home, a new home, modest and warm and entirely in her name, with Clara sleeping against her chest and a cup of tea going cold on the table beside her, because she had forgotten to drink it. She was looking out at the sky, not at rain, not at cold and dark and a slammed door, at light. Ordinary, unremarkable, beautiful morning light. And she was smiling. Not the smile of a woman who had won a battle, and the smile of a woman who had decided a long time ago that she would not let the battle define her, and had been proven right. And that, right there, is the whole story. Not the deed, not the locked door, not Dorothy's consequences, or Vanessa's exit, or Derek's tears. The whole story is a woman who was thrown into the rain, who did not drown, who did not become cruel, who prepared with intelligence and moved with dignity and built something real from the wreckage of someone else's contempt. That is the story. That is the lesson. That is what we came here to learn. The lesson for every viewer who stayed until the end. This story taught us 5 things that are worth carrying with you long after this video ends. 1. Know what is legally yours. Always. Not because you expect betrayal, but because knowledge is the foundation of every kind of protection. 2. Preparation is not paranoia. When someone shows you who they are, the wisest response is not denial. It is readiness. 3. Dignity is not weakness. Elaine never screamed, never performed, never collapsed into bitterness. But she also never surrendered. Quiet strength is still strength. 4. The people who laugh at you in the rain are usually standing in a house they don't actually own. Let them laugh. Know your deed. Change your locks. Call your lawyer. 5. And perhaps most importantly, winning is not about destruction. It is about decision. Elaine won the moment she decided what kind of woman she wanted her daughter to see. Everything else was just paperwork. Dear viewers, you just watched a woman be thrown into the rain, poor, pregnant, and humiliated, and rise not with vengeance, but with vision. This story was never just about a deed or a locked door. It was about what happens when a woman decides she will not be a victim of someone else's cruelty, and prepares accordingly. Drop in the comments the single biggest lesson this story taught you. And tell us, what would you have done differently if you were Elaine? Your answer matters. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories like this don't just entertain, they equip.